Welcome to Control Your Career, a podcast to help you conquer uncertainty, shatter imposter syndrome, and rise above the expectations imposed by others. My name is Julia Toothacre, and I am the career coach and strategist at Ride the Tide Collective, my career development company where I offer career coaching courses, and I have a plethora of free content. I have been doing this work for over a decade, and I want to help empower professionals like you to find clarity, navigate your current career with finesse, and propel yourself toward career advancement in alignment with your unique personality, preferences, and values. This podcast is a great place to start your journey toward controlling your career. Season 10 is all about managers and specifically what managers want and expect from their employees and teams. I've brought on managers with at least 10 years of experience managing who are also currently managers to help you understand their mindset and expectations. Each episode will have action items that you can apply to your unique situation and consider in your relationship with your manager. You can find this episode and more at ridethetidecollective.com. And you can connect with me on LinkedIn, where I post career information and inspiration to help you control your career. Welcome, everyone. We have made it to the end of season 10, and I am going to be doing a wrap-up episode. I felt like there was so much good information in all of these interviews that I wanted to take some time to really synthesize it together, talk about what I learned, some of the best practices, some of the things where we saw managers differ. And I'm just really excited to go through all of this with you. So let me give you a little bit of a rundown of what this episode is going to be like. And I will also have timestamps for this as well, just in case you want to go to a specific section just to hear about that. So first, I want to talk about some of just the more, I would say, shocking, quote unquote, realizations that I had throughout listening to these episodes. And some of them are going to be that shocking, but I think the fact that we're voicing some of these things and managers are saying them, that's what I really wanted to bring to the table. So we're going to start with that. Then I'm going to go through some common themes that I saw throughout this season, and just talk through a little bit of that. And I'm going to give you some references and examples from the episodes themselves and from the managers that I interviewed. We're also going to talk a little bit about some of the contrasting perspectives that I saw. So that's going to also be a theme here as well. One of the things that I think is going to be most helpful is going through the 5 different management styles that I picked up on throughout these interviews. And we're going to give you some examples of that and talk about some of the benefits and some of the challenges of those different management styles. And it's really fun to actually go back and listen and really hear those styles come out in how the managers interviewed with me. And so for you as a listener, that's a really great opportunity for you to listen to a manager that has a certain style to see if that's a style that really resonates with you. And then I think one of the most popular sections is going to be the resume and interview tips from the manager perspective. We've had this from the recruiter perspective before. Now we've got the manager, and honestly, it's not that much different. But there are some differing things and some things that managers, like certain managers, focused on versus others. And we'll talk about why, because there are reasons and nuance to that as well. I'm going to touch on PIPs again. I know this was something that I went through in every interview, and I think really synthesizing what I learned is going to be really important for everyone to understand that PIPs look different in every company with every manager, and that was really shown throughout this season as well. And then finally, at the end of every episode, I asked the managers to share a tip that they would give to current employees. And so I've put all of that together, and I'm going to share all those tips with you so that you have them all in one spot just to help you think about things that you could do and take that tip in for yourself if that's something that you would like to implement. Okay. let's get going with kind of the top shocking, quote unquote, moments that I found within the interviews. So, one of the first ones, and this is actually so relevant because I've seen a lot of data and a lot of articles written about this. I've done press on this topic, and it's the uh, shifting from in office to remote work. So, if you were listening to all of my episodes, Mike Ferris from ZEP, he actually talked a lot about the transition from being in the office to remote work. ZEP really embraced remote work. And I say that this is shocking because a lot of companies are doing RTO. We're seeing so many RTO mandates come down right now. And that's having a lot of different implications for professionals. And so the fact that we got to hear from somebody whose company is saying, no, like we're going to embrace this remote work. We're gonna embrace it. I think it works out. Now, obviously, ZEP also has um, warehouse operations. This does not apply to that. But Mike's role is in customer service and managing customer service agents and professionals. And so it worked out well for them, right? One of the reasons that he said that it worked out well is because they actually have systems and processes set up that allow them to still continue to monitor and track employees. You know, when we're talking about call centers and customer service and all of that, you know, that all gets tracked. We talked about that in that episode. And that was one of the main reasons that Mike said they were able to really embrace the work from home model because they had all of these things set up. There was a lot of shifting that had to be done for him as a manager, and he talks about that in his episode. But I thought that was such a refreshing conversation to actually hear about a company that's embracing it instead of saying, no, you've got to go back. All right. And then another kind of surprising um, situation that I saw in the interviews actually came from my conversation with Tomas Company from Adidas. And what was interesting to me is the opportunities that Adidas provides. Now, a lot of times when we talk about large global companies, they do have really great systems in place and all of that. But the level of development that Adidas puts into its employees and the longevity that the employees have, I really feel like that's something that other companies need to really start embracing. Tomas had been at the company for a very long time. He made an international move and stayed with the company. And then a lot of his coworkers had been there for a really long time. And so I think what's really great is Adidas really invests in their people. They believe in their managers, they believe in their employees, and they provide opportunities and resources for them to grow. And I think that's really important as a company. And again, I don't think we see that enough. And so that was one thing that I really wanted to make sure that we pointed out and gave kudos not only to Tomas as the type of manager that he is, which he is an extremely people oriented, empathetic manager, but also just to Adidas and the different work that they're doing to help empower their employees. So the next thing that I want to talk about is really more of a powerful moment where I saw really the difference in how managers view PIPs. And if you've listened to this season, you know that every manager has a different approach. I'm going to go more in depth with that later in this episode. Um, but John Harper's episode really brought to light this idea that for some managers in some companies and just the type of work that they do, the PIP is kind of the final warning for employees. And he was really forward about that, and not in a bad way, in really a look, if you're on a PIP, that means that likely your manager has done something already to try to help you through whatever is going on. And so where some other managers have seen it more as a developmental opportunity in certain situations, for John, it's really this is like I've done what I can do. And so now we have to go through this official channel. And so I think that's good to understand in terms of where your manager falls with that type of procedure and what the company views as well. Um, the other thing too is remembering that your managers, the majority of them are trying to help you grow. They're trying to make you better. So you as an employee also have to be responsive to that. So if you can tell that your manager is asking you questions, is challenging you on things, it's probably because they're trying to help you move forward. They're trying to help you grow in your position. If you ignore all of that, then this is where you get to this point, right? And so for John, it really was like it's a last ditch effort to clarify expectations through an official channel. And his episode, honestly, was one of my favorites because I just loved how he was a combination of really direct in his communication and his management style, but also very supportive. If he saw that you wanted to grow and you wanted to be a better employee, he was right there cheering you on and helping you do that. And so I think that um, this way that he's talking about pips absolutely makes sense because it means that he's exhausted everything that he can do. And one of the things that he also talked about is kind of the emotional divide when it comes to pips. It can lead to that, right? Depending on where the employee is, depending on where the manager is. But at the end of the day, it really is about clarity and respect and truth. And we're trying to help you grow as a professional. Not everybody takes that well, and not all managers deliver it well. And so this really can be on both sides. So this isn't oh, the manager needs to do this, the employee needs to do this. It's really everybody coming together for the best outcome of everyone. And one of my favorite quotes from John is, if I can't be candid with you, it's almost like I'm not giving you the respect of treating you like an adult. It's almost disrespectful to not be candid. So anyway, y'all know me. I'm very straightforward and candid. So I'm really along the same lines as John. And that was a really fun interview to do with him. Okay, another kind of shocking, startling realization was in Marcy McDonald's episode where we talked about nonprofits. And I think for people who are interested in nonprofit, you definitely need to listen to that episode or watch that episode. But one of the things that we talked about was funding positions. And when you're a nonprofit, a lot of positions are grant funded, which means that they are temporary. And sometimes they have a very clear expiration. And, Marcy will share that with whoever is being hired. Sometimes there's an expectation that it will become permanent through additional funding and things like that. But I think when you're applying for these types of positions, you need to remember that, especially in nonprofit, your position is not guaranteed if it's grant funded. And honestly, it can end at any point. And so you just need to be careful with that when you're applying for positions and understand what it is and realize when you're being hired for it that you might only spend a year or two in that position. So I think that's one of the things that is really nuanced into nonprofit, but is also important to understand. And then our final realization, and honestly, this isn't going to be a shock to anybody, but I love that Renee said it. So in my interview with Renee Trotman, she talked about how often managers are thrown into leadership roles without proper training or preparation. And if you remember, Renee herself is a people manager, but she is also doing a lot of human resources work. So she's really front lines in terms of working with managers and has done that for many years, along with herself being a manager. So she really has two different dynamic looks at management. And so I loved that we got to talk about this because this is something that I have been screaming from the rooftops. If you follow me on social media, I talk a lot about preparation. I talk a lot about training programs and all of that. we do not train our people enough anymore. And that goes from onboarding a new employee to training a new manager or pre-training of a manager to make sure that it's something that they want to do. I think a lot of times what happens is somebody's really good at their job and then they get promoted, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be a good people manager. And so that's a lot of the conversation that Renee and I had in her episode. And I really appreciated that conversation. And I love this quote that she had in it where she said, you can be a great individual contributor, but if no one has set you up to lead, that's where you see the horror stories unfold. So again, Renee's episode is a really wonderful look at not only her people management style, but just looking at people management as a whole and talking about that. So if you are somebody who aspires to be a people manager, then her episode is one that I would definitely look at and watch and listen to kind of hear her perspective as somebody who is in human resources. All right, now what I want to do is talk about some of the common themes that I saw, along with some of the contrasting perspectives. And again, what I loved about this episode was being able to bring people managers on who either I know personally were referred to me, and some of them I just met and ended up really enjoying the conversation. But the thing to remember is managers are people too. They make mistakes, they mess up, they also can help you. And I felt like the group that I brought in this season, we got to just learn so much about who they are as managers and how they got to where they are. But we also got to see insight into how they make decisions and just how they approach people management. And it's all a little bit different. But here are some of the common themes that we saw. One of them was empathy and relationship building. I don't want to say I was shocked because also, I mean, I chose the managers too, but I think a lot of times the noise and the message out there is your manager doesn't like you, your manager doesn't care about you, they care about the bottom line, blah, blah, blah. And I think that this season really showed that no, managers do have empathy and they are trying to build relationships. And empathy was a core value that was actually voiced as empathy for many managers, male and female, which I think was really interesting and inspiring as well. So in one of the interviews, Rhonda Mullen talked about emphasizing the importance of understanding the individual's journey and establishing trust. That was one of her big themes was how can I get to know my people individually? How can I build trust with them? How can we have a really good relationship? And then remember, they are human, they are people, and we have to treat them as such, which is where that empathy comes in. Similarly, Jenny Derrick, in my conversation with her, she highlights the balance between being a leader and nurturing relationships. She's in kind of a unique position in the managers that I interviewed because she plays almost the CEO-like role, leading a business school. So she's doing multiple things at once, but she also has staff that report to her. And again, if you watched her episode, she was my manager at one point in my career. And I really appreciated her and wanted to have her on to talk about her style because I just love how she approaches that. And I think looking back from my experience, empathy and relationship building is very core to who she is. And I really appreciate that about her. Then we go into trust and autonomy. This was also a theme that I saw, but I am going to tell you it came across in specific functions and industries. So I saw the trust and autonomy really come out in my conversations with Mike Ferris from ZEP and Adam Trusty, who does healthcare management. And also in John's episode, I think trust and autonomy because of the work that they do. So John manages sales professionals. Adam manages healthcare professionals. So doctors, nurses, office, so kind of across the board. And then Mike is doing customer service. These are all functions where there has to be high trust because it's all client customer oriented work, but also autonomy because your people are having those conversations with clients and they need to be able to have those conversations. And so I really loved how they articulated that and how we saw that come through in those conversations specific to the type of industry and function that they work within. And one of the things too, in all three of those, also, I have to point this out because this really supports the idea of autonomy. There's proper training and expectations, right? So when you talk about the trust and autonomy, that can happen when you train your people, when you give them clear expectations. And those industries that are represented by those managers, it absolutely makes sense that trust and autonomy are core to their management style because the industry and the function really require it. Okay. And then another common theme is adaptability to change. So this was a common theme in multiple ways. So it was a theme amongst the managers and how they manage and needing to be able to adapt quickly. So I think about Mike, Mike and Tomas in their positions where they had something happen and there had to be an evolution of their management style, right? Mike went to remote work and had to figure out what that looks like now. For Tomas, not only did he do a move across the world, basically, but he had some familial challenges, some health challenges. And then he took over for his boss. There were a lot of different things happening there that really required them to be adaptable and to change as leaders, as managers. But I would also say too, and I saw this kind of run through most of my conversations, is managers talking about their people, the people that report to them, also needing to be able to be adaptable in certain situations. So I think that we can see it from both sides. Okay. And then a common thing that we saw was clear communication and accountability. And oh man, did this come through pretty much every conversation that we had. And I think that's because as managers, you really want to try to be clear in your communication. You want to be that person to help hold your people accountable. And again, I think I brought together a really great group of managers who are the the positive ones, right? The ones that are trying to make an impact. They care about their people. And I think that's really the difference. We see that in John's episode. Again, he was very direct, he was very straightforward, and we saw that come out. He wants to be clear, he's going to be direct with you, and he wants you to be accountable to the work that you do, and he's going to hold you accountable. Similarly, in Renee's episode, we saw that as well. Accountability was huge. If we're not holding our managers and our people accountable, because she also manages managers, what are we doing? We have to have that piece of it. And I think that this is an area where a lot of companies actually don't do a great job. But individual managers can really bring that to the table. And then finally, the last common theme that I'm going to talk about is learning and growth. And this is really amongst the managers themselves, because we talked about kind of their journey to management. And we really saw how that evolved throughout the years. And every manager talked about that. And I really appreciated the honesty that I saw with these people. I remember specifically in Marcy's episode, she talked about how she kind of had more of this dictatorship style early in her career, which likely she learned from someone, right? Like we learn to emulate the type of management that we see. But she also realized very quickly that that style does not work and didn't work. And she evolved. And now I've known her for a number of years. And man, does she do so much work to understand her people and to help create a cohesive team and help people evolve and all of that. And I'm not saying it's easy. There's always going to be challenges, but I've seen her growth firsthand. Um, Also, if you want a really good story, go listen to Jenny Derrick's episode. She talks about early in her career, what management was like, and then the shift. And I'm going to tell you, as somebody who has been in academia, I worked in higher ed for many years. Being a woman in academia and specifically on the faculty side, which is Jenny's path, is hard. And so she talks a lot about her journey and her path to management. And again, I've known her for many years and she managed me and she was one of the best managers I've ever had, and specifically one of the best female managers that I've ever had. And we actually talk about that through her episode. So those are some of the common themes that I saw. And I hope if you listen to the whole season that maybe you picked up on some of that as well. So there are a couple of other contrasting perspectives that I wanted to point out, because even though I heard some similarities from a lot of the managers, they also had differences in terms of how they approach certain things, their priorities, all of that. So let's start with the role of relationships in leadership, because I had a couple of managers who were higher level leaders. And so they're balancing a lot of different priorities along with their people management. And so one thing I wanted to point out was Renee and Jenny both talked about relationship building, right, as part of their style and all of that. But how they approach it is very different. So with Renee, she focuses more on balancing the personal connection with accountability. She's also in a different, she's in a different industry as well. And so that also plays a part to this. Whereas Jenny, being more in academia, she emphasized a little bit more vision setting, right, as a way to build trust. Because in academia, especially in the business school world, as a dean, you have to have a vision, and that vision is what helps everybody in the school buy in to you as a leader. So her approach was much more bigger picture vision setting so that she could influence a lot of people at one time, whereas Renee took a more personal one-on-one approach. Now, that doesn't mean that they each don't have those things, right? It doesn't mean that Renee doesn't do visioning. It doesn't mean that Jenny doesn't do, the personal connection. I know for a fact that she does, and she holds people accountable. But in terms of the priority and what comes first and how they lead, those are some of the differences. In terms of approaches to trust, we saw some differences there. So a lot of the managers this season did talk about trust. Adam Trusty, he talked about trust in terms of, I'm going to trust you until I can't. And he really emphasized, like, I'm going to trust you until you give me a reason not to. So if you don't meet the expectations, then that is going to impact the trust, right? Versus Tomas and Rhonda, they had a little bit different approach. They really wanted to dig in with somebody a little bit more and build more of a relationship with them that also built alongside trust. Neither approach is wrong. It's just a different approach and a different way to look at it. And I think I love seeing some of those contrasting strategies to building trust. A couple of quotes I want to share just from this topic that I really, really loved. One was from Renee Trotman, where she said, "We come to work I think as people managers, we have to remember that they're people, they're human, the people that report to us. They're not just the job. And I think she's referring to so many managers who get so in their head, they forget that their team is people, right? And their job is to help them grow and evolve and change. Excuse me. And I just love that she points that out in that episode. And then another one comes from Jenny Derrick, where she said, I love feeling like I can make an impact. I love feeling like I can influence the direction of where something's going. So again, that supports her visioning, right? She really sets the tone and the vision, and she's trying to help you get on board so that you are bought into the vision and you care about where the organization is headed. Let's talk about management styles. This was something that I loved to really ruminate on after going through all these episodes and talking with all of these managers, because you really see the different styles come out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through, I think it's five different leadership styles. This is not all the leadership styles. This is just what was represented through these interviews. I'm going to let you know who represented this style. We're going to talk about it. So this is going to be a little bit more educational for you as a listener. And the reason that I want to go through this is I want you to understand that each manager has a style, whether or not they know it. You know, how they speak, how they talk to you, how they interview, how they come across. Like, you can pick up on some of these as you're having conversations with your manager. And so my hope is that you can help identify the type of leader that your manager is, and then understand the benefits and challenges to that. So we're going to talk about that for each style. And then also, as you're doing interviews, like maybe you're preparing for a job search or something like that, you can also ask questions in terms of what type of leader somebody is. And I hope that some of this information will help you as well. So first, and no surprise, is empathetic leadership. We talked about empathy earlier, and we had a number of people who really represented this, but we saw it most in Tomas Company, Renee Trotman, and Rhonda Mullen. So those three episodes are going to be the ones where we're going to see empathetic leadership really, really well and really clearly. So to give a description, this style is centered around building strong, trusting relationships with the team, being emotionally intelligent, and fostering a supportive environment. It really emphasizes understanding employees' individual needs, goals, and emotions while encouraging personal growth. So when we talk about the benefits here, a lot of times it's higher employee engagement. Now, there's a lot of caveats with this. I'm not going to go into everything, but higher employee engagement because employees feel valued, supported, they feel like their manager cares about them. Stronger relationships is another benefit because, again, you feel like you can trust your manager. They care about you. They're building that relationship. And then there's usually more of a focus on development. These are managers that really want to see you succeed in your career, whether it's with them or somewhere else, right? They really support that. Hey, it's time. We don't have any space for you here. I want to help you move out. I actually have seen managers do that before because they want their people to succeed so much. But there are challenges, right? There are challenges to empathetic leadership. One of those is the risk of being seen too soft. So again, if you're somebody that maybe doesn't want that type of leader, you want somebody that's a little bit more direct, then you want to make sure that, you know, this isn't necessarily the right leader for you because you can be seen as too soft. And in some cases, it can also be time consuming. So as a manager, if you are an empathetic leader, you have to figure out how to balance the relationships and the work. Because if you are prioritizing your relationships with your team, sometimes that can take over. And now there's higher stress because you don't have enough time to complete your own work. So you just have to think about that balance. And then finally, and this is one that when I was in higher ed, I saw happen a lot. There's potential for blurred boundaries. And so what that means is close relationships with employees, you can sometimes make it difficult to maintain authority or handle performance issues. Not only that, but favoritism really comes into this. I saw this a lot in higher education because that's a high empathy space, especially in student affairs, which is the area that my office typically went into. Um, and it's again, you as a manager have to be able to set those boundaries and recognize in yourself the type of leader that you are. But also as an employee, I know for me, I want a manager who has empathy, but not so much that I feel like it's going to be used to manipulate me at some point, which some people actually do. So again, there's benefits and challenges to this, and we just need to be aware of both sides. And then next, we have more autonomy focused leadership. So these are leaders who are more hands off. I would say that this was seen most with Mike Ferris and Adam Trusty for obvious reasons, right? Mike is managing people remotely. Adam manages like 100 people. So we have to look at what is possible. And so for them, autonomy focused leadership absolutely makes sense. So these are managers with a style that provide employees with a lot of independence. They set clear expectations and give team members freedom to meet those expectations in their own way. This, for me, this is the ideal leadership style. I don't know about you. But these leaders avoid micromanaging and trust their employees to perform. So that's why when we were talking about trust earlier, Adam's approach is different, right? He doesn't have time to build the same type of relationship because he meets with so many people and he has so many people that he oversees. So he has to trust you implicitly from the beginning until you give him a reason not to. So some of the benefits here, increased autonomy and empowerment. So if you are somebody that does not like to be told what to do, you just want to know what the end goal is, this is a great management style. Development of leadership skills. So because this style fosters independence, it allows the employees to be more self-sufficient and it allows them to really grow professionally because they have to problem solve and they have to figure things out on their own. So they really do gain a lot of additional skills. And then efficiency, right? So again, I keep taking it back to Adam, but it's just because he oversees so many people. But even for Mike, having to go through all the customer service pieces and train and all of that is very time consuming. And so when you have a more autonomous style and you just deal with issues as they come, that creates a lot more efficiency as a people manager. This is less time spent overseeing day-to-day activities, right? They're not micromanaging. And it allows the manager to focus on other strategic priorities. But remember, there are challenges to this as well. So for some employees, it's going to feel like there's a lack of guidance, right? You might feel unsupported or uncertain if you're not getting enough feedback. So I would say for people in early career, this is not a great management style to be under unless you are somebody who is a go-getter and very self-sufficient and wants to be independent. But if you're somebody that still needs feedback or you're not sure, you're doubting yourself, this is not going to be a good management style for you. There is a risk of underperformance if the expectations aren't clear by the manager, or if there is no follow-up, if there isn't a good system, employees might struggle to meet goals or they take advantage of the freedom in an unproductive way, which again harkens back to Adam's episode of I'm going to trust you till I can't, right? And so you want to really think about that. And then communication breakdowns, unfortunately, if there aren't frequent check-ins, then there might be misunderstandings, misalignment in the team goals and priorities. So you really while this is such a great management style for people who are independent, if you're somebody who needs more support, this style is not going to be the best for you. So you really want to think about that as you're looking at your own manager and maybe their style or the type of manager that you are, and how you can articulate to your team or prospective employees, right? Like who you are as a leader. All right. And then one of my favorites, direct and candid leadership. And this is represented by John and Tomas, which, if you will remember, was also under empathetic leadership. So you can be both, which I also think is really important here. And I think there are a couple of other managers that fall into the direct and candid leadership as well. Just because I know them, I know that Mike falls into that as well as Jenny. So there are multiple episodes where you can find that as well. So this style is characterized by clear, candid, and sometimes tough communication. Managers with this approach, they prioritize honesty and clarity in their feedback, whether it's positive or negative. They believe in holding employees accountable with direct feedback and fostering an environment where expectations are clear and understood. So there's a lot of benefits to this style. We've talked a little bit about this in other sections, but clear expectations and accountability, you as an employee will always know where you stand with a direct manager. And so sometimes it's easier because you know exactly what they want. It also promotes self-improvement, right? Because you're getting direct feedback. I know this is my style. And so whatever I'm going to tell you, that's exactly what it is. There's no sugarcoating. There's no alternative method. What I'm telling you is what I'm telling you. And so my style, along with them, it allows you to take immediate action because I'm telling you exactly what needs to happen. And then it's time efficient, right? Because we have candid conversations. You can quickly address performance issues without unnecessary sugarcoating. So again, this is a style that I think in certain areas and certain functions works really well. I think about John being in sales. A lot of sales professionals, they just want the direct information. They don't want it, sugarcoat and all of that. And even Tomas, he does a lot of analytics. His team does a lot of analytics. It's the same thing. Just tell me what I need to do and let's move forward. But there are challenges. And again, as somebody who mimics this style, this is my style, there are some challenges, and I've seen those firsthand. One is the risk of alienating employees. So if the delivery of the feedback or the information is not delivered with empathy, then it can be perceived as harsh or disrespectful. And sometimes that can damage relationships. I know that when I was a people manager, I would sit my people down whenever they got hired and I would say, look, I am very direct. I'm not mad at you. You're not. If you were doing a bad job, I would tell you. So my style is very direct. Please do not take it as anything other than that. So I really prepped my employees because I wanted them to understand my style so that I didn't have to constantly sugarcoat and caveat everything for employees. Now, that doesn't mean that I didn't get to know them and try to adapt to their style. I did, but I also made it clear that there are times where I'm going, and I'm going to be really straightforward with you and you can't take it any other way. So there's potential for discomfort. I also experienced this. Some employees find direct feedback uncomfortable or demotivating, which can impact performance and morale. So I would say that this is something that I was actually on the other end of, where I received this and it was uncomfortable. And part of that is because the information was delivered very disrespectfully. And because I'm somebody that is also direct, I know how to deliver information with empathy. And so to see it happen without empathy, you see very quickly how that can turn a team and turn an employee. So if this is you as a manager, I really implore you to talk to your team members, talk to a coworker, like a co-manager, something like that, and ask about your delivery, ask about how you're coming across, because that can be really helpful for you to maybe adjust some things here and there. And then also some of the challenges to this style is it can be difficult to navigate sensitive topics. Certain situations, being direct, it can be seen as being insensitive, particularly if it's with personal or emotional challenges. So a lot of times managers who have this direct, candid leadership are not the one that you're necessarily going to go to if you're having a personal crisis or something like that. However, it depends, because we also saw Tomas on the empathetic side, and even John, he really, in his interview, he really cares about his people. So yes, there's a direct side to this, but you also have to remember that a lot of times people do care. They don't always know how to manage that energy though, right? And so I think there has to be kind of understanding on both sides. But I think once you've been with a manager and an employee for a long time, um, their style and how to approach each other and all that. And then we have the collaborative relationship building leadership. And this was seen again by multiple people, but we saw it really come out in Renee Trotman's episode, Marcy McDonald's, and Jenny Derrick's. And I do want to say Marcy and Jenny are both in nonprofit. Renee, I believe, is in education. And so there's some similarities in terms of the type of work, and it actually makes sense for this style to come out because of the industries that they are in. So this style emphasizes teamwork, collaboration, and relationship building. Managers with this approach create a cooperative environment. They seek input from team members. They prioritize team cohesion, to everybody getting along, and alignment with organizational goals. And they tend to engage in two-way communication and joint decision making. And I'm not going to get too into the weeds with this, but this is also very indicative of female leaders versus male leaders. I will say the male managers that I interviewed for this season, I felt also had this. So I don't know if that is a generational thing, although I did represent multiple generations throughout this season. But I think it really is personal to the manager. And so while I have women leaders who are represented for relationship building leadership, I saw that come out in Tomas. I saw that come out in Mike and John as well. So I don't think it's exclusive to women, but you will see it more often and more clearly with women. So some of the benefits of this style, stronger team unity, because we're fostering collaboration. Employees are more likely to support each other. You don't have like infighting within a team, right? You also have increased employee engagement. Employees who feel involved in decision making, they're invested in their work and they want the team to succeed. So it's not just me, it's how can the team succeed? And then you see a lot of creativity and innovation. So a collaborative environment encourages diverse input. We want to know if you have a differing opinion. And it can lead to better problem solving and new ideas. And I can actually tell you, because again, I worked for Jenny, the juxtaposition between her style, which really represented this, and a different style that was not this, you really saw the collaboration. And I saw this firsthand, just how creative we could be as a team when we were all on the same page and we felt comfortable being able to say, I don't think this is going to work. And here's why. And then there's challenges. There's always challenges, right, to every leadership style. And for this one, slower decision making, like nonprofit education, super slow. So the process that involves everyone, multiple voices, it can take a long time to come to a conclusion on something. And again, I've lived that firsthand working in education and nonprofit. There's potential for conflict And so this is where being a really good mediator as a leader is helpful. But if team members have differing opinions or styles, work styles, the collaboration can result in tension and disagreements. I've also experienced that firsthand being in education and working with faculty because they have opinions. We all have opinions. But in academia, people really fight for their opinions. And so at the end of the day, I think we had such a supportive environment that it didn't last long, but we definitely saw some of that tension come out when there was disagreement. And then finally, there is a risk of too much consensus seeking. So some managers struggle to make tough decisions if they're overly focused on pleasing everyone or avoiding conflict. And so, again, this can happen in a lot of nonprofit environments that I've seen as well as in education, but it happens everywhere. Sometimes you feel like you have to include certain people, whether you really need to or not. And then the final leadership style that I saw was performance oriented leadership. And this really came out in Mike and John's episodes. And again, that is partly because of the industry and the function that they work within. For Mike, he's working in customer service, which is also sales. It's like customer service sales. And then John is sales as well. And so those functions are performance oriented and the leadership is going to look different. And it has to look different because of the goals of that type of work. So managers with this style, they are highly focused on results and metrics. They set clear, measurable goals. They track performance. Again, sales. This style prioritizes achieving outcomes, often using performance data and benchmarks to drive decisions. So if you're somebody that does not want to be tracked in that way, these are not going to be good areas for you to go into. Okay. But there are some benefits. So benefits can be clear goals and measurable success. I've found that people who have a history of sports, maybe you did sports growing up, you were in collegiate sports, going into performance-oriented careers actually is really helpful because it mimics being on a sports team and is really performance oriented. And so you have those clear, measurable successes. You know exactly what to expect, how it's measured, and you're seeing it, being tracked all the time. There's high accountability. We heard this a lot from John, actually, in his interview. Employees are held accountable to the results that they deliver, and they have to make sure that the expectations are met. And I do remember John talking about if you're not meeting those, then we need to have a conversation and we need to be clear and we need to be candid. And I need you to be honest with me so that I can be honest with you. And there is a focus on results, right? So you're aligning your efforts toward achieving organizational objectives. And again, this is performance-driven industries. So some people love that. They love having the results and knowing this is where I stand, this is what I'm doing, all of that. So this might be a good fit for you if that's something that you really like. But there are challenges. There always are challenges. This can lead to burnout, especially if this isn't a great fit for you. Being so heavily focused on performance, it can lead to high pressure, and that pressure can lead to stress and burnout depending on the manager and depending on the environment that you're in. There's a risk of overlooking employee development, right? Because there's an overemphasis on performance and it can sometimes neglect the personal and professional growth of the employees. Now, I think the managers that we brought on did a really good job of trying to balance that, but that is not always the case. And I know this just from having clients who have been in sales positions before. And then in some cases, there's potential for low morale. If you feel as an employee like your worth is solely based on the results, then that and your results maybe aren't where you want them to be, then that can really lower your motivation and your morale. And then that leads to other challenges because you're not necessarily meeting those expectations. And in some cases, it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong. It just means that you're not performing to the level that the company wants. You might be doing everything you can and the contracts aren't working out. So there's a lot of like nuance to this as well. One thing I want to say, going through all those different styles is each management style has its own strengths and weaknesses. This is not indicative of every management style. This is just what we saw represented in this season. And I think what is really key to understand is each manager is going to have their own style. And sometimes that style is going to be informed by the function that they're overseeing or the industry that they're in. And we really saw that represented here. And so I want to make sure that you, as an employee and a professional, you understand that the type of work that you do and the type of industry that you go into might not be a good fit if you've been in it for a while and you notice that you're not jiving with it or you're getting the same types of managers over and over and over again, because that's the type of manager that works well in that industry, in that function. And if that doesn't work for you, then you have to find something different. And that might mean switching industries or switching functions. So just something to think about.
Hey there, Julia here. Is this episode resonating with you? Maybe it's got you questioning how you can better communicate with your manager, team, or just learn more about how to control your career. Well, I've busted into this episode to tell you about my career action coaching. Career coaching is more than job search and resumes. It's also about managing the day-to-day situations that come up in your career. This coaching option is perfect for the career management situations that you're dealing with, along with other career-related challenges or goals. This is a flexible coaching option to help tackle specific topics to move forward efficiently and confidently. Not all coaching requires a 6-month commitment. Career action coaching is 3-hour-long sessions that can be customized to your unique needs. Before committing, let's discuss what you need in my complimentary career coaching clarity call. The link will be in the show notes and the description for this episode. Now let's get back to the show.
All right, let's talk about resume and interview. This was something that I asked every manager, and we did see some common themes, but we also saw some differences. So let's talk about what that's going to look like from this season. So one of our common themes that we saw was clear and relevant experience. I think this is a little bit of the barrier we're seeing right now in how people are applying. I'm not saying that the hiring process isn't broken. I know that it is. There are a lot of barriers. There are a lot of issues. However, there are a lot of people that are saying it doesn't matter. Just go for it. Apply for the position. It doesn't matter if you're qualified. It does matter. It does matter. Because hiring managers are looking at your resume and listening to you in an interview. They want to make sure that you have clear and relevant experience. Now, in some cases, this depends, again, on the position and the manager and the industry and all of that. But for the most part, the managers across the board in this season said that resumes need to highlight relevant experience and it needs to align with the role. So that means that there has to be some tailoring. You might need to move some things around. If you're interested to know more about that, I do have a resume guide that shows you how to do that. But also you need to include specific skills and quantifiable outcomes. I think this is especially important in your sales positions, in your analytics positions, things like that, because you want to show that you have success in that type of work. So a couple of examples from this season. Mike talked a lot about measurable results. Again, he's in customer service and sales. And so he wanted, on the resumes that he got, he's looking for customer satisfaction. He's looking for call resolution times. He's looking for specific information related to call centers, customer service, and sales. Um, Similarly, Renee Trotman, who does more human resources work, she's looking for that alignment of skills, right? So you want to read the job description and make sure that you have at least some of the skills that they are looking for. And you need to articulate that through specific accomplishments. And a lot of times in Renee's experience, it's team leadership or performance metrics that she is looking for, because I believe that she manages managers, similar to John. And then we have cultural fit and soft skills. This was something that I saw pretty frequently. And I think that that's because of the type of managers that I brought on, but I think we had a good juxtaposition of this as well. But most of the managers actually did agree that soft skills such as communication, emotional intelligence, and adaptability, which we already talked about, are crucial for a candidate's success, especially when you're talking about team environments, which a lot of our managers managed teams of people, not just individual contributors. And then also looking for that company culture fit. And I think, especially with company culture, that's really going to depend on the industry and the company. So, for example, Meredith Allen, she works for startups. She works for smaller organizations. And so she is looking for adaptability, right? So more of those soft skills, but also somebody needs to be versatile and be in a dynamic work environment because she's in such like changing environments. And so you have to want to be in that type of culture. And so that's something that she's looking for from candidates. Similarly, John Harper talked about the importance of collaborative skills and cultural fit in the interview process. Even though he does sales, yeah, we're doing sales and we have our own numbers, but are we also supporting each other? You know, yeah, there's a level of competition, but there's also a level of we're still a team, we're still working toward the same goal, and we want to have a positive work environment. And so he also wanted to know, especially in the interview process, again, he wanted candidates to talk about examples about how they've worked in teams and how they've dealt with conflict, because that will give him insight into, are you going to bulldoze everybody in the team, or can we all work together? Similarly, Marcy McDonald, being in nonprofit, culture fit was a big conversation that we had in her interview, because you have to be passionate. You have to be passionate about the nonprofit that you are going to work for. If you don't have some type of connection to it, it really does make it hard for you to connect to the work, to connect to the team, the donors, all of that. And so she's really looking for, do you understand this organization? Whereas I think for other people, that is something, but it's not at the heart of the interview process the same way that it is for her. And so she wants to make sure that the candidate can demonstrate how their values align with the nonprofit values and goals. So that's something to think about if you're going into that type of work. And then another common theme that I saw was just the focus on growth and development. And so for candidates, being focused on growth and development in your resume and in the interview process. So these managers wanted to see some type of growth from you. And a lot of reason for that is because it shows your engagement in your work. Because again, managers do care. Even if you've had a bad experience, there are still managers out there who want you to succeed, who care about the work that you do. And, you know, the managers that I interviewed, they want to know that they can trust you and give you additional responsibilities, and you're going to rise to the occasion, right? So a couple of examples of that came out with Mike Ferris in his interview, where he prioritized resumes that show specific performance metrics again, and then how that person has progressed in their role. So are you continuing to do the same thing every day? Or Are you taking some stretch projects? Are you doing something a little bit extra? Because in the back of his mind, he's thinking, is this somebody that I could promote down the line? Right. So he's already in the interview thinking about the future of that person. Similarly, we have Jenny Derrick, who is in higher education, working in a business school, and she is looking for candidates who can demonstrate leadership and initiative. And again, because I worked for Jenny, she's huge on initiative. She wants you to come with ideas. She wants you to make your role whatever you want it to be within reason, obviously. But she really is supportive of you seeing where there are issues and coming forward with problem solving and how can we fix this. And so you would want to demonstrate that in a resume that you're submitting for her. And then also Marcy in her episode, again, the nonprofit space, she values candidates who have grown in their roles. They've been in leadership positions. They've taken initiative. I think initiative is a term that a lot of the managers said at one point. I want somebody that's going to take initiative. And I think if you are somebody who is looking for a job that you're just coasting through, then these managers are not going to be a good fit for you. So that's also something for you to be very self-aware of. If a job description is calling for initiative and you just want to phone in your job, which is totally fine, right? You just want to show up, do your job and leave, then a position that says like must have initiative is not going to be a good fit for you. So you want to think about that as you're going through the job search process. Okay, let's talk about some differences because there were some differences in how these managers approach the resume and the interview. It doesn't mean that they didn't care about these things. It's just that they prioritized them in a different way. So the first one is the focus on performance versus soft skills, which I already sort of touched on. We definitely saw a difference there. And remember, we talked about, the different functions and industries having a different focus. This is exactly what it is. You have performance oriented positions and you have more positions that require high level of soft skills and relationship building. And that priority is going to look different. So for example, Mike is really prioritizing performance metrics because of the customer service aspect. Whereas Jenny, her people really need to have leadership qualities, long-term career vision. There's a lot more problem solving versus procedural work, right? And so the focus of what they're looking for on the resume is going to be different. One of the other differences we saw is in how the managers conducted interviews. So some managers took a very formal route and some took a more informal route. This is very dependent on the level of the position that they're hiring, the industry, and the company. So I know that for Tomas in Adidas, they have a very structured interview process. That is not uncommon in large organizations where they want to be able to show the differences and similarities between candidates and make sure everything is very, very fair. That's also very common in non-management level hiring, right? So individual contributors and things like that. Whereas Meredith Allen, again, she works in smaller like startup organizations. And so because that's such a dynamic environment, a lot of times they don't have the same procedures in place. And their interviews tend to be more informal. And it doesn't mean that they're not asking the same questions. It means that they probably veer off of the questions a little bit more because they want that more informal conversational style. And as we know from Meredith, you have to be able to work collaboratively. You have to be able to take initiative, right? That's what she's looking for. And so she wants to create an interview environment where you're going to be comfortable and show up so she can really figure out who you are. And then we have Marcy, who really does a combination. of the informal and the formal, right? So she does have structured interview processes, but she also really wants to have a conversation and get to know you. And she combines those two processes together. And not that that's indicative of anything, but I think that you see those differences depending on the companies. I know a lot of times in startups, they are a more informal process. And so you as a candidate just need to understand that when you're going into interviews. Also, who you're interviewing with at what level. So an interview with Jenny, because she's a dean, it's not going to be structured. She's going to have some things that she wants to talk about, but she's going to have your resume and she's just going to ask you questions and she's going to talk about her vision. And you guys are going to have a conversation because she's high up. So that's a different conversation than you're going to have with somebody like Mike, right? Where he's hiring for customer service representatives, individual contributor. We have specific things that you need to be able to do. Yes, we're going to train you, but I need you to be able to do X, Y, and Z. The vision and big picture is not as important, right? So you as a candidate need to understand your level and the type of interview that you are likely going to go into because of the function, the industry, and the level. Okay, this one I think might upset some people, but there were differences. So when we're talking about resumes, some people prioritize experience, other people prioritize potential. And I think this is where I see candidates get the most upset, because we see managers who really do prioritize, like, have you done this type of work before? And then other managers who are really looking at, are you going to fit and can I train you? And do you have honestly the right vibe to fit in with me and the team? And as a candidate, that can be very frustrating to try to manage through, right? So, for example, with Mike, and we've talked about this a lot, he's really looking for experience and tangible results because of the type of positions he's hiring for. So he needs you to have direct experiences in customer service. Whereas somebody like Renee Trotman in HR, she's looking for potential and growth and development. And yes, I want you to have some skills, but honestly, we're going to teach you a lot anyway. And I just want you to have an initiative, right? I want you to be able to take initiative. I want you to want something out of your career, and then we'll kind of shift through things as you get hired, right? I would say also John is like that as well. I think he's a lot like, yes, you need to have sales experience, but he's also looking for, can I train you? You know, do you have the potential to be trained? So, and I think as a candidate, if you're doing a career switch, being able to articulate potential, even in a situation where experience is something you're looking for, if you can make that connection, that's what will help catapult you ahead. That's where I see a lot of candidates make mistakes when they're doing a transition, is they're not articulating for the position that they're going for. They're articulating for the positions that they've had. So you want to think about that if you are on the job hunt. In an effort to synthesize all the resume and interview advice that these managers gave throughout the season, I wanted to break some things down without referencing them, but just some common themes that I saw to help you as a candidate as you are applying and submitting resumes as well as interviewing. So I want to go through that. And I hope that this will help you understand from the manager's perspective what they're looking for within hiring. So this is like really wrapping everything up with that. So first is clarity and relevance. So regardless of the industry, your resume and interview should clearly demonstrate experience, skills, and accomplishments. Even if you have to adjust language, that's what needs to clearly be there. You also need to make sure that your resume aligns with the role that you are applying for and includes measurable outcomes. Measurable. Okay. We need numbers. We need something. So in your current position, you need to start keeping track of that if you're not already, or you need to go pull numbers. You've got to give them something, because even in positions that require more soft skills, they still want that measurable outcomes language. And then also make sure that you're balancing performance and soft skills. I think especially in sales positions, there is a heavy emphasis on performance and we leave out the soft skills. And more managers are talking about, no, I need to see the soft skills because that's how I know that you're going to be able to fit in with the team or with me as a manager. Okay. So make sure that you are including communication skills, emotional intelligence, and teamwork somewhere in your statements on your resume. And I cannot stress this enough, but tailor your approach. And this goes a lot of different ways, but as much as you can in your research and in your conversations, you have to understand the manager's priorities, which means when you are interviewing, you have to be listening. You have to be listening to what they're saying. You have to read the job description, make some inferences about what they're looking for and what they're prioritizing. Some want to hear from the past. They want those specific results. Others care about growth. They care about fit. So listen to the questions that they're asking and make sure you're giving them the right information and adapting on the fly, which I know can be very hard for some people, but you really have to be actively listening and adjusting what you're saying to the manager in the interview process. Also, just being prepared for interviews. So many people talked about how their candidates will come in and not be prepared. They haven't looked them up on LinkedIn. They haven't looked up the company. They just don't have any idea what they're really applying for. And that's why you don't get to the next stage, right? So you might have had a really great resume, but if you get to the interview and you don't know anything about the person you're interviewing with or the company, it's not going to look good. Similarly, you need to be able to talk about your achievements and your challenges. So you as a candidate, you have to be prepared for that. You need to provide specific examples of how to problem solve, how to adapt, how you can collaborate. Those were three areas that came up very consistently. So those are three areas that I would have at least one or a few stories to just be prepared for the interview process. Some managers in the interview, they're also looking for honesty and self-reflection in your answers, which might be why you're being asked certain types of questions. So they're trying to gauge your emotional intelligence essentially, and they're trying to understand if you can look at yourself and really go, yes, this is who I am. This is how I've approached this. This is how I've grown, right? So they're looking for a little bit of that vulnerability from you, again, depending on the position, industry, company. And then finally, just research and fit. When I hear about people applying to hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of positions, it's not the best way to go about it because you're not researching and you don't know if it's a good fit. And then that makes it harder to align yourself to the organization. So regardless, you have to do some research onto the company culture and as much as you can on the management style. You're not always going to be able to find that, unfortunately, but some people are on LinkedIn and they talk about it. You know, these particular managers that I interviewed, they did a podcast. So now if you're interviewing with one of them, you have a podcast to reference about who they are and their leadership style. So you need to do that level of research when you are applying for a position and going in specifically for the interview. But honestly, The interview is a sales pitch in a lot of ways. It's a sales pitch where you are convincing them, like, hey, I'm already qualified. You already screened my resume. I already have the qualifications. Now I want to show you that I'm a good fit for the team and I'm a good fit for you as a manager. And in some cases, you might not be. And that's okay. That's okay. But I hope that that helps give you some practical tips straight from the managers across this season to help you on your job search journey. All right, next up, we have to talk about PIPs just for a little bit because I know that this is an area that people feel very strongly about. And so I want to make sure that we can synthesize some of what was talked about on this season. So we had some common themes and insights that I saw around PIPs that I want to share. I'm going to keep this part a little bit shorter just because I know there's, again, a lot of feelings and you can go kind of look at each episode if you want to hear more about it. But one of the things that I noticed with these interviews is PIPs should be seen as a developmental opportunity, not just a punitive measure. I'm not saying that people don't use it as a punitive measure. They absolutely do. And we have seen that. But in this case, the managers that I interviewed, the majority of them, it really was a developmental opportunity. And they didn't get to the PIP until they had exhausted other things and they just needed that accountability for the employee in order to move forward, right? And in some cases, it's just helping to correct a behavior, maybe that they brought in from another experience or something is going on and the manager hasn't been able to get through. We just need something a little bit different. So, for example, Mike emphasized that PIPs can serve as an opportunity for growth, not just a step before firing, right? That's not necessarily the end goal. The goal is this is an issue I'm seeing, but I'm not seeing you put effort into fixing it. And so we need something a little bit more formal and that has accountability for us to work through it. He talked about seeing PIPs as a way to identify areas for improvement. He also shared a couple of stories of his employees where they had to go on a PIP just because of repeated behavior. He'd had conversations. The behavior kept going and we had to go to a PIP and they ended up fixing it. It ended up being fine. But again, it's not always about how can we fire you quickly. It really is about communication. So something else to remember about PIPs is they are most effective when there's clear communications and a structured plan. So a lot of times this will happen when maybe performance is struggling for whatever reason, and there just needs to be clear outcomes. And in some cases, maybe the position the person is in is not a good fit, and the PIP helps identify that, and then you have to make a choice on what to do, right? But when employees are put on a PIP, it also requires additional accountability, check-ins, all of that. In my episode with Renee Trotman, she talked about this really extensively, actually, because of her work with managers, and she helps train managers on how to do all of this as well. And she really wants to make sure that there's clear communication between the manager and the employee. And in some cases, there hasn't been previously, right? Remember, she was saying not all managers have been trained. Not all of them understand what to do. And so some of them resort to a PIP to help clear up the communication. So it's not about the employee necessarily did anything wrong. It's more about we need to be clear in our communication and get out of whatever we're in so that we can move forward. So another thing with PIPs is they need to be tailored to individual needs. There are some companies that have very formalized PIP processes, and that's fine. But at the end of the day, that process really has to be tailored for that person. So as a manager and an employee, you need to make sure that the PIP is clear and it's going to meet that person's individual needs and goals. This is something that Meredith Allen talked about. And I think, again, given the work that she does, working primarily in startups and smaller organizations, she wants to help understand the root of whatever the issue is, which I think a lot of managers feel that as well. But in order to do that, then there has to be an extensive conversation so that the PIP is written in a way that is actually going to help the employee. Um, and one of the things that she actually said was PIPs should reflect a personalized approach. It's not just about correcting a mistake. It's about creating a path forward that makes sense for that individual's growth. So again, it's not about how do we get this person fired. It's about, okay, we're seeing this happen over and over again. What's the root cause? How can we fix it? Let's use a PIP to just help track. Because at the end of the day, if that employee can't fix whatever's going on, then we have to figure out, are they in the wrong role? And we need to move them into a different position. Or is this company not a good fit? And then it does move into a situation of firing. I don't want to act like PIPs are not used to get people fired. They absolutely are. And whether managers own up to it or not, there are situations where the goal is for that employee to fail. I think at the heart of it, no manager really wants that person to fail. But if there's a misalignment, if there's miscommunication, if the employee doesn't want to be there, if the manager honestly just doesn't like that employee, there are so many things that can happen that lead to a PIP. So I don't want you to hear me and go, this is like la la land. Like, this is fantasy land. This doesn't happen. I've only ever been in situations where PIPs are used to be fired. I think that's unfortunate because I don't think that that's the case in every situation. But unfortunately, that's the case in a lot of situations. And a lot of people are vocal about that. And so you don't necessarily hear the developmental PIPs because that requires somebody to say, I kind of messed up here and I had to take ownership of it and I was on a PIP and all that. People aren't going to say that. So if you're, on social media hearing about PIPs and it's like, this was used to get me fired, da, 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 da. I'm sure it was. But that doesn't mean that they weren't used for developmental purposes as well. So just something to think about, but also understand your manager's view, understand the process at your company, because in some cases, that PIP can be used to your advantage depending on what's going on. So, all right. I want to keep that short and let's start to wrap this up. I mentioned in the beginning that each manager gave a tip to current employees to be successful. So I want to share everybody's tip just so that we have it all in one spot for you to go over. And honestly, I just love all their tips. I think they're really useful. So let's start with Rhonda Mullen. Her tip was to take ownership of your development. Always be looking for opportunities to learn and grow, whether it's through formal training or informal feedback. Proactively seek out feedback and be open to it. Mike Ferris talked about being proactive and taking initiative. Don't wait for someone to tell you what to do. Show that you can solve problems and take action on your own. Be the person who makes things happen. Meredith Allen talked about focusing on developing your soft skills like communication, collaboration, and emotional intelligence. In today's world, technical skills are important, but the ability to work well with others will set you apart. Marcy McDonald talked about knowing your worth. I loved this one. You have to advocate for yourself and be clear about your career goals. Don't be afraid to ask for what you need, whether it's a development opportunity or a conversation about your future. Not enough employees do that. I can tell you that. Adam Trusty said, don't be afraid to ask questions and learn from others. People often hesitate to ask questions because they fear looking like they don't know something, but those questions can be the key to your growth. Tomas talked about taking ownership of your career development, and you know that I love that. Identify your strengths and weaknesses and align them with your career goals. Don't wait for someone to tell you what to do. Be proactive in shaping your own career. I love Tomas and I love that message. From Renee Trotman, build strong relationships at all levels of organization. Your network can be one of your most valuable assets. And the more relationships you have, the more opportunities will come your way. Yes, I cannot emphasize that enough. Then we have John Harper. He says, stay focused on developing yourself as a person, not just as a professional. Skills and achievements are important, but your personal growth and development will shape the kind of leader that you become. And then finally, we have Jenny Derrick. She says, don't be afraid to step outside your comfort zone and embrace challenges. The moments where you feel stretched, the most often lead to the biggest personal and professional growth. I am so grateful for all of the managers that were able to join me on this season. I really hope that you enjoyed this as well and you got some insight into what it's like to be a people manager and all of the similarities and differences that they have. And just remember that not all managers are bad. Not all employees are bad. There are such unique situations surrounding hiring and your career and just this entire workforce situation that we all have to be in. And, you know, this is a good time to really do your research and your homework to figure out the right type of manager that's going to work best for you, the function and the industry that's really going to align with who you are. So thank you for joining me on this season. And I will have links to all of these individual interviews in the blog post for this episode, which will be linked in the show notes. And I look forward to seeing you next season.